Welcome to episode 32 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In episode 31, we review hallucinations in AI agents and how to deal with them. In this episode, we're going to discuss the problems that can be created when people lose the context of a statement or recommendation from Google or industry gurus and the risks of misreading advice. They make these claims in social posts and you just take them for granted. We can't be doing that. So, Bill, you actually created a rant on this on the International Web Mastery site. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I always like to talk about my rants. It's funny that, so I saw, I think it was early Monday morning, I saw an email come in from Barry Schwartz from Search Engine Roundtable about Hreflang and 301 redirects. And what he covered was basically a search marketer asked John Mueller on Mastodon about, do we need to have 200 status pages to use Hreflang? Or his was a little more nuanced than that. And we have links in the show notes to it. And basically, to my point is, Barry's title was Google, Hreflang tags with 301 redirects are probably okay. And the moment I saw that, before reading the article, I closed it and I sent you a note and I say, hey, Bill, I think this is going to ruin my week. And I didn't quite let it because I wasn't going to read the article. And then, of course, it's like a train wreck. I need to, or car wreck. You got to look. And when I first read it, using a critical thinking hat, I took it to mean exactly, I think, as John posted it, which was, his exact quote was, if they're 301, it's probably okay, but it sounds like it might be worth figuring out how to automate it so you don't need to manually track and tweak these. Clean links make tracking with tools easier and reduce chances of miscanonicalization. Not a ranking issue, but tracking is challenging. In that answer, again, depending on how you interpret it, it's like, okay, yeah, it's probably okay. But if you go back to Matt's actual post, he said, hey, back in 2018, you tweeted about Hreflang tags needing to point to 200 status pages, right? Is it still relevant today? After a global migration, ours is a bit hit and miss, with many cases where we link to pages with 301 to our new home. Could we consider those broken, or Google handle it? So whenever I see that, can Google handle it? And then prefaced by it, and I'm not dinging Matt, but hey, in 2018, you said it's good that if these are 200 status pages. Okay, so however many years later, 7 years later? Yeah, is it still good to have this? Of course it's still good to have that. And then, but the true context that John was responding to is, hey, we've got hit and miss. Some of ours are not perfect. Is that okay? And could we or should we consider those broken, and will Google handle it? I really, really wish Google would have responded with, those are broken. We will not fix it, and, move on. But John, in answering this, and he tries to answer a very nuanced question with a generalized answer. And I think he was answering really the latter part of this, about it's probably your reports that are showing this and not eat. So that's why I sort of said, okay, I can interpret this. So my critical reasoning interpretation was, if most Hreflang annotations are okay, that's fine. It's more a matter how the reporting looks than causing problems. So rather than, trying to find these and play whack-a-mole and fix it, it's probably okay for a few of those.
And who's to say that he's not talking about Hreflang in general? Like, okay, so you have a few pages that don't work, that don't, fit the criteria that we're looking for Hreflang, but there are probably other signals that will fix that because the rest of your site has Hreflang implemented properly.
Right, but
let me have it. Go
yes. ahead. So let me jump down to why we should care. So first thing is, the number one thing you need in Hreflang is the reciprocation. So if you have A equals B, so A is old URL pointing to B, let's say the UK page. The old US page has a canonical to the UK page. The old US page has a 301 to a new US page. Let's call that C. And if C doesn't have a reciprocation back to B from the new US, doesn't link back to the UK page, then it's broken.
Right.
There is no reciprocation. So that's, to me, and like I put in bold text, is that immediately is enough to reject the idea that 301s at Hreflang are fine. That you can't have that because the reciprocation is broke. And this is why I took a pause in responding, because I think you were saying if the UK team had a link back to the correct US page, then at least one half of the reciprocation is correct.
No.
It is a circular replication.
But no, what I was saying was if you have 1,000 pages and 100 of them have redirects, John might be saying Hreflang is okay, but those 100 pages aren't going to work.
Correct. And I wish he would have said that.
That was my interpretation.
Exactly. And you're 100, right. So 1,000 pages, 900 of them have correct Hreflang implementation. Those 900 will be correct. The 100 that do not will be broken and will most likely have. Now, had I answered that question, and I did post a response to it, I would have said, no, they are broken, full stop, and added the clarification that you did. Hey, those that are correct and will work. And maybe we can figure it out. But the second thing that I put in our article was Google doesn't always figure it out.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying Hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.
Now, remember, this was a migration. Migration is the most fragile of transactions and transitions you can do, because we rarely do one thing. And there's a really amazing tweet that I have sort of memorialized in all of my redirect and migration presentations is, for every change you make, you're increasing the degree of complexity, right? If you change the URL, if you change the content, if you change the template, if you change the length, if you took content out, you added content in, every one of those things is a variable. And so the last thing we want is to screw up geo-targeting and misalignment. And here's why I get spun up about this. When you do this migration, and I actually give an example from someone who did a migration and they too thought that Google would figure this out. And they did not update their Hreflang. And then when they finally called me was 3 months after they did their launch and said, none of our new UK pages, none of our new Ireland pages, none of our new Australian pages are being indexed. Can you help us? And I said, open up Search Console. And we went down to the canonical duplicate report in the UK. And it was almost 100% of their pages in the UK were not in there. Google said that we took the US version of this page as the canonical. And, I said, Google's telling you right there that because you haven't mapped the new US site and the equivalent US page to the UK, the new UK site, then when Google picked up the US or came and got all your new UK pages, they're like, these are exactly the same as what they have in the US.
Right.
So
the whole reason for Hreflang.
There's duplicate.
Yeah.
Now, had there been an Hreflang, there's 2 reasons for this that we really advocate this, especially during migrations. Number 1, it gives that page a purpose, meaning it explicitly said this page is for the UK, this one is for Ireland, this one is for Australia. So that's 1. It gave them a purpose. Second, because they were all interconnected, and Google has said this multiple times, because Hreflang triggers the very reciprocation check that we just talked about. I need to make sure that the UK is equal to the US, and the US is equal to the UK, and the US is equal to Ireland, and Ireland is equal to US. Through the virtue of doing that check, it will ingest all of those URLs and visit them exponentially quicker than if it had to find them on its own.
Yeah. I mean, you really, really shouldn't be launching and then following up with Hreflang. That's a killer.
It has to be done at the moment
Yeah.
of doing that for that very reason, because we want, like if you launch a new market and it's identical to another market in the same language, it's a little bit easier if you launch it in a different language because it's in a different language. Then you might be able to buy some time. But I will guarantee you, because I've done hundreds of these and fixed hundreds of them, where people have done a migration and didn't do Hreflang, didn't update Hreflang, and basically got screwed by it because the pages were now considered dupes. Because in what we advocate, and in there's a link to the Google Search Off the Record podcast where they brought in Alan from the dupes team, and he gave away a gold mine. The first is the marauding black holes. So this, and what he does is there's a quote that we have in there from him that says, a significant challenge for the dupes team is applying weighted logic to detect duplicates, especially when a webmaster sends conflicting signals. So when you have hreflang that's not correct, and like you said, maybe they've got canonical correct, that this old page is equal to the new page and there's a redirect, so maybe we can figure it out. But he went into this whole redirect marauding black holes where, especially e-commerce sites, they use 302s and 301s, and there's all these gimmicks and tricks to make the page look like it's just temporary unavailable. He said all of that stuff causes significant problems for them. And so anyways, that's, there's three reasons why, but let's just circle back to the whole point of this is I just knew that it wasn't going to take long for somebody to send me an email and say, Bill, see, John said.
Yeah.
and as expected. So on Wednesday, I got an email from an SEO that I had spoken to a week prior who had added their e-commerce site. They were using Hreflang Builder. They appended a regional ID to their US, their North American sites. And because they appended this regional ID, Hreflang Builder, which I'm only an ambassador and evangelist for Hreflang, so I had to send them to their support team. But I told him, look, that code, we can't interpret that code, and it's breaking the automated mapping logic that Hreflang Builder uses. We know that they all end in the same SKU, and so everything that ends in the same SKU is mapped, and it brilliantly executes it for 67 country sites. But now it's broken for the US and Canada and Mexico because you appended this parameter on the end. So you need to tell them to add in a parameter exclusion, if you will, to either trim. We can either trim the parameter or we can include that as an alternate variable. Mm-hmm. And if you do that, it will be good. So that's how Hreflang Builder works. We try to say, oh, okay, yeah, this same URL with this regional code, what is it, NAM PC or NAM product code, just so they know internally that this is from a North American page, then we will automatically remap all that. So that's a brilliant function in Hreflang Builder. And so I told him to do that. And he's like, well, that sounds like a lot of work. No, if you give them the codes, because they also did it in APAC. So if you give them those two codes, it'll probably take them 15 minutes to rebuild everything, and then, so I told him to do that. And then I get this email with a screen capture of from the article, Barry's article, saying, see, I told you we didn't need to fix this, that Google can understand this.
And that, I don't know the screen cap, but what we're talking about earlier has nothing to do with breaking the hreflang. That is, it's not a redirect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a redirect, and then and he's like, well, can Hreflang Builder build something to follow this, that if it detects, and like, remember, we're not checking that because, you're actually paying a fortune to one of the other crawling tools that we import via API.
Hmm.
And so again, he tried to push it back on us because, or on the Hreflang builder team, because, they made a change to their website. The point being is that he argued that he didn't need to change anything on his website because Google should be able to understand the old page is equal to the new page. And because the old page actually equals the new page, that should fix Hreflang. Now, another plug for Hreflang Builder, we actually have a migration function where we can take the old URL and new URL table, the redirect table, load that in. And because now it says old URL that equals all these other markets is also equal to this new URL. So it's essentially adding another column in the logic table, in the mapping table. And so just by simply uploading that, really 3-column, the ID that you're using, the old URL and the new URL, it will add that third piece, the new URL, to that. And this will work magically. As long as you didn't use a wildcard, then you still have to figure out old and new. But if you did that. So anyways, that was what I was telling him to do, and the system would fix it. But yeah, that was, an interesting thing was someone, just 2 days later took this as a universal statement and was trying to apply it. And that's our whole point in this is be careful when you're applying a nuanced statement as a universal statement.
I want to dig into a bunch of things that I've heard over the years. And, you're like me, like we always think in terms of how would a developer handle this. But there's been some statements that can definitely take wrong. And I just want to go through some of these things.
Sure.
Like links are not that important anymore. Actually, what he said was over-focusing on links will often result in you wasting your time doing things that don't make your website better overall. Well, those are two different things, making your website better overall and obtaining links to help you rank. So people hear backlinks don't matter for SEO. What he's really talking about is he's emphasizing that quality matters more than quantity.
Yep.
There was actually some changes there was a March 24 core update. The spam policy documentation, Google uses links as an important factor in determining the relevancy of web pages. So relevancy versus rankings, I don't know, but we know that links matter. And even Gary said at a PubCon that links are not even in the top 3 ranking factors. Yeah, it's probably the 4th. Right?
Yep.
Word count's not a ranking factor. People take this as short articles can rank just as well as long ones. But really, what you need to do is you need to make sure that the context of the query matches the page. So you have to meet the searcher intent. You can't write 50 words and not meet the searcher intent and expect to rank.
Right. And then now you got people talking about all the AI answer strategies or the AI overview strategies, talking about 2,000 word documents where you can cover every variation of nuance of, those various if-then statements that are good for AI agents. That if, what's the second, third, fourth, fifth step in a sequence? So again, now we've got two things that are counterintuitive. One group saying keep them short and brief, and then you've got UX people saying short and brief and bullets because nobody reads, people do content grazing. And then you got another group of people now saying, hey, you need 2,000 word, 5,000 word documents so that, you can get all the nuances in there. And then, there's the poor person in the middle that's saying, well, which do I do? What do I do? And then, it circles back to the whole statement is right for your customer and everything will be good in the world. And I think this is the problem. And then one person will say it or somebody say it. And I think I meant to go in and count before this, but in our course, Understanding and Fixing Hreflang Common Errors, I think I have more than a dozen screen captures of where people said things related specifically like this to Hreflang. Things like it doesn't have to be a relative URL. I mean, it can be a relative URL. It doesn't have to be a full path. There's a whole bunch of them in there where we tried to explain why they think that. We've tried to debunk it. And at the end of the day, we come back to chapter and verse in the guidelines that says, what are they saying? And this circles back to two or three things. Why do we need to deviate? Number one, what is your rationale for deviation? Number two, what is your rationale for this extrapolation or interpretation?
Mm-hmm.
And then the one that I put in, I'm debating, do I want to update this rant or do I want a new one? We were talking about this. So today there was another one that came out and where John posted a meme where, just a person posted on Blue Sky. I don't think it was to John saying, hey, I'm just wondering if there's any SEO benefit to using structured data and schema. He was what is it? He was asking a question, making a statement, and so John posted, basically structured data won't make your site rank better. It's used for displaying the search features listed in the Google Docs. Use it if your page is mapped to or appropriate to these features. And then, what was interesting is in a couple of and then all the three main trades picked it up, right? And one person just straight out, John's a liar. And somebody else countered and said, I use schema, and when we get rich snippets, we get more clicks.
Yeah.
And Google's secret documents say clicks are a ranking factor. Therefore, schema is a ranking factor. And, when I was an undergrad, I took a fallacy of logic course, and it was all about how we get into these traps. And one of these is called a post hoc trap or the equivocation fallacy, where and most SEOs cause it's correlation, not causation.
Mm.
And, this example is schema may improve the appearance. It may get you in a place where you're answering someone's question or you're presenting information in the right way, which may foster clicks. And those clicks may actually affect rankings. But we can't make the leap to say, because you had a rich snippet and that rich snippet was enabled because you had schema, that schema is now a ranking signal. It enables an action that may. And so I think all these things, and I think you've got a couple more that we can talk about where people have taken that leap. The other one is true too. I think we talked on episode 2 or 3 about the case where an SEO for a company from their India team read that a celebrity SEO said H1 tags don't help SEO anymore. So he removed their H1 tags. They weren't just there for SEO, he removed them. And basically they got hammered. And when we did the root cause analysis of why did we lose, one, it was only India. And two, it was templates where this coder removed H1 tags.
Oh,
and so
wow.
when we
So
put
you actually
H1 tags back,
you had a clean test of one region on a single domain?
one market.
Huh.
He only did it in his market. And, we talked about this test where we took all the pages where traffic dropped more than 10%. And then we took those pages and we crawled them. Now, the one thing that was nice about this company is they had a template ID on every page. And the template ID told us that all the drops came from 3 templates. And when we cracked open the templates, we saw the H1 tag was missing.
Wow.
And then we nailed it down. We figured out who made the change to the template. And then, we could ask him why. And he said, well, because this celebrity SEO said they don't help. And could they possibly hurt us in any way?
Yeah.
No, I guess not. Yes, they can, because we use them for accessibility readers, because the template was also flagged by the accessibility reader that we didn't have an H1 tag that it uses on accessibility scoring. So we put it back in, we submitted the pages, and almost like magic, they started ranking again. Was that the only reason? No, but it was enough to say, don't change stuff just because one singular person said, made a comment.
Right.
It's just like when they said, Google doesn't use your disallow file. So I can't remember how many people I saw reaching out to their agencies to tell them, remove my disallow file. If they don't use it, does it hurt anything? And Google's now said, don't waste your time on disavow. That's why they got rid of it. But the point was, think about this logic. Is it hurting us? Like the H1 tag. There's now dozens of people that believe that it, and I'm not going to argue if it does or doesn't, but if it doesn't hurt you in any way, why do we need to remove it?
Yeah.
And that's how we should approach all these questions is, okay, what's he really saying here? Is he really saying all H1s don't negatively impact Hreflang? Maybe he's not saying that because, and I love the quote that he put up for this last one. When he, about this schema, he has the Abraham Lincoln quote that says, if I'm given 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend 4 hours sharpening the axe. And what he's saying is, before you jump into something, understand the fundamentals, understand the technical mechanics of this, that a sharp axe is exponentially better than just simple brute force when trying to cut down a tree when using an axe.
Right,
But,
right.
and that's what he's saying. And so I think this is what we're saying is use critical reasoning whenever you see any of these. And is it going to hurt me? Is it exactly what he's saying? Is this a isolated case or is this a universal? It is very, very, very rare that Google ever states something that's universal in a social media post without linking to an article, on the webmaster guidelines where they can go into greater detail on the nuances and exceptions and things. So again, our whole point on this is be very, very careful when you read these things at the context.
I say you have to take these things and read them like a lawyer, because as you start to peel away from the comment, you can ask, like, does that mean that this doesn't work? You go down through a bunch of questions that you would have, and if it's unclear, then it's probably unclear for a reason.
Right, exactly. Yeah, do that decision tree, a logic tree, whatever. It's like, okay, does this make sense? And again, like you said, think about it as a lawyer, think about it as if you're, a 5-year-old and you're asking the repetitive questions. Just spend a little bit of time trying to, sort this out. And, does this really make sense? Is it applicable to me? Is this universal statement? And how could this be wrong? Any of those critical reasoning steps to try to dial it in.
Yep. So a couple other ones that I found, we don't use domain authority. Well, yeah, no, they don't. That's a metric. But what makes up domain authority, right? It's all of the things that Google says is important. It should be a high authority site. It should be trusted. And basically, domain authority was reverse calculated to try to figure out how Google's algorithm works. So, I would definitely prefer having a mention or a link in a high domain authority site versus a low domain authority site. Digging into that more, John actually confirmed that Google does have domain level metrics that map into similar things. New content added to an existing domain will initially inherit certain domains from that domain. And what's another one? I didn't research this one, but EEAT, they came up with this concept, EEAT, and then they said it's not a ranking signal. Yeah, no, they don't have a single EEAT metric, but all of the things that make up EEAT are used in determining the importance of a page.
And the one thing they did clarify is you can't add, this is not something you can sprinkle on a website.
Right.
Right. It goes back to your whole, I can't even utter those initials, the sort of domain reputation, right? It's the same thing, right? We applied an industry tool acronym and scoring method or sort of quantification metric to this, but it's exactly the same thing. The domain has certain value. It has certain relevance. And I think we talk about this in our Thinking Like a Programmer, in our programmer's guide to SEO or to technical SEO. We talk about that concept is, if you had to crawl something and you had a choice between 50 sites, which one of these would you go get? The one where you already have, and you already have a set of data that says it's good, it's reputable. And that's the whole, EEAT thing, right? Is there some signals that have told us they're authoritative, that they're an expert? And this was the whole argument. It's funny, this whole equivocation fallacy thing that we apply is exactly that from SEOs, that, okay, if I have these things, therefore they must be good. And how do I artificially create them? So I'm going to put up a knowledge box saying that I'm a lawyer and I've done this. And then the one that like Danny was banging on in New York was, so the one that always gets me is like, now when I'm scrolling through, what is it, Google Discover, and I saw one yesterday that was like the chef's choice. There's something with cooking, and it had an explanation about the tariff calculation. And I'm like, why the hell does a chef site, have anything to do about tariff calculations? Now, maybe you're importing, sort of Italian or French or whatever products, and you need to understand it. But when I went to the article, it was just somebody trying to, jump on the tariff bandwagon, and it was written by, wasn't by any chef. It was just somebody was able to get a link, an article on this chef site. And that's what they're talking about, right? There's no context to that. You're not an expert in tariffs. You can, as a chef and as a restaurateur, talk about the impact of tariffs on your native goods that you need as ingredients. That's perfectly in alignment. And I think this is our thing, is that we're too quick as SEOs to extrapolate things, to bundle things. We also like to go the opposite way and poo-poo things. Google says there's no, domain authority score, but, so the one argument stands that, then, okay, I don't need to. So if you tell me you have a domain authority of this when you're trying to get me to buy your links, I lose all respect for you. And then that same person the next day might be saying, look, if you don't build up your authority in that, and as you said brilliantly, if your site doesn't appear to be an authority on a topic, and it doesn't demonstrate continuous expertise on a topic, then why would we show it? I love Danny's point. You're the 1,157th fried chicken recipe.
Yeah.
Why does Google need to have that? Why even does it need to be in the index, let alone why would we show it?
And thinking like an engineer, how would you rank all of those if everybody updated their title, their first sentence, the H1, they used the alt text? There's got to be other things that they're using. And
exactly.
So we know that's the case. One other thing, and Google's flip-flopped on this, the comment, you could use AI generated content. So now they went from you can't to really what they say is you can use it, but it's got to be good. So what people hear is Google approves all AI content.
Yeah.
What they're really talking about is you can use it, but it's got to be quality content, regardless of who or what wrote it. Can't be spammy. It can't be duplicate, just another rehash of what's out there, or made purely to manipulate rankings against the guidelines. I don't know how someone would figure that out. But, well, I guess if you had a churn and burn site, that'd be obvious to a person. But, the intent and the outcome matter more than the tool used.
Exactly. Why were you doing this? And what do you, and then again, one of the things that I used to tell people, like I worked with a company that used to build websites for lawyers, and, they would sell these packages to lawyers, and these lawyers would want to know, okay, they put it out, the 30 topical article package, and the lawyer would sit back and just wait for the traffic to roll in. And it's like, why would Google, there's no signal in the world that said you're there. And I'm trying to be careful here.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Nowadays, it's not being careful of them. It's being careful on the Google side. So, if you think about this, it would be impossible today to have anything really new without any social media mentions in context, right? It would be impossible. Maybe impossible is too harsh of a word, but no, I'm going to stick with impossible. I think, if you had a new product and you had loyal fans, people are going to talk about it. They're going to like it. They're going to hate it. You're probably going to do some news, and the news is going to talk about it. They're going to like it. They're going to hate it. But the point is that new concept wouldn't exist in a vacuum. And so imagine you put out a bunch of content and there was no other signals pointing to it. Nobody was linking to it other than within your network. There was no social media. And I think this gets to be, it almost can't happen. So imagine that's a pretty interesting indicator of you being an authority or it being relevant or it being newsworthy. Those kind of things where, again, they don't happen in a vacuum. And we see this with mass produced content. And I think you nailed it, right? There is a difference between writing something and having something edited or putting it out there and having it be good. But if you now decide, oh, okay, Google can take AI content and it's cool, and you want to pump out 200 sites, that's all about the same thing, or mix and match things, and you build these link networks and all this other stuff, they're going to see through that.
Yeah.
And so that's when it doesn't work. But and then like companies, we've seen this on the Hreflang side, where companies were just pumping out hundreds of thousands of documents to go after featured snippets, answers and dictionaries and glossaries, and pumping it out. And what we started to try to tell people is you can't put out this document on machine learning without any mention of your machine learning offering.
Yeah.
There's no context to you. So just simply having the machine learning is the standard thing. And, in one of these cases, we found that this exact same, like anywhere between 65 and 85% of this content was on 20 or more websites. Meant the company that produced it for you just extracted it, modified it a little bit, and put it out in the world. And there was not a single reference to them other than a link to their other machine learning as a part of artificial intelligence, and a link to their artificial intelligence page, which linked back to the machine learning page. But nobody integrated any of your machine learning or artificial intelligence offerings. And I think this is where people start to get in trouble, is they're not adding any value to this. There's no context to their greater business. And at the end, it all comes down to how well you write these prompts. You can write prompts that put out some amazing content and then have people review it. And then, you can do like Navarro did with his, trade concepts, and you can be your own advisor. You can be your own expert. Just create an anagram of your last name, and, you're now your research expert. Anyways, it's just, economists get what I'm talking about. But the point is that whole thing of, it's like that. Now, I think your point is basically people are hearing AI content is good. So, let's flip the switches and churn and burn this and pump it out there by the ton, and Google will like it. Right. That's not what we're saying.
Right. So I guess I'm going to finish with this one. Google doesn't use bounce rate for rankings. What people hear is user behavior doesn't affect SEO, but I think he's really saying is Google doesn't directly use Google Analytics bounce rate as a ranking signal. But that doesn't mean that user engagement doesn't matter. We know that Google's always talking about user satisfaction, and one of the things that they can measure without Google Analytics is the pogo sticking, being someone click on a result, go into your site and hitting the back button right away, or staying. And we know that they use terms like long clicks in some of their documentation. So
dwell time and things like that.
Yeah. So just, while bounce rate is a measure in GA, it's still really important to make sure that you have good user engagement. But yeah, so, what I would say is it's really important to take these things in context, making sure that you're thinking like a lawyer and not just taking it on the 3 out of the 12 words, or, as it relates to the question that John might get in one of his podcasts. And Google's not going to give away the secret sauce. Obviously, they need to keep all of that stuff behind the curtain so that they don't give away their intellectual property. So, Bill, any final words?
No, like you said, just, understand the context, use some critical reasoning to these, don't sort of make strategic decisions based on a headline or a social media post, dig into it, understand the why, build a rubric for it, and then, again, go from there. So, put on your thinking caps, think like a lawyer, try to challenge it, see if it passes a sniff test. And if it does, then think about how we can leverage it for our business and go from there.
And I also want to bring up what you had said earlier, like if it's not hurting you, why even put the effort in to make changes?
If it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Bill. Good seeing you.
Good seeing you. Yeah. Have a good one.
We hope you're finding value in our conversations. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to rate and review the podcast on your favorite platform. Also, we want to hear from you on social media. Please go to Facebook, LinkedIn, X, do a search for International Web Mastery, and tell us what you think.